Hey everybody, my name is Michaela Schick, and this is my presentation for EDL 851, Module 8. I apologize, but Screencast-O-Matic doesn't really work for me, so I always have to open it like that for some reason. So first I'm just going to talk about general information regarding teacher evaluation. So all this information mostly comes from the articles that we read for the class, and then I have a couple different sources that I'll talk about throughout the presentation. So first, what is evaluation? So evaluation is the metrics that are used to determine the effectiveness of a teacher. So we are using evaluation to determine, is this teacher effective? Is this teacher ineffective? Are they doing what they need to be doing to make sure students are being educated properly? Historically, most of this is based on observations conducted by a principal, which is what I am used to for my own evaluations. That's what my evaluations are based on, which I will kind of discuss more in depth later. And then right now we're kind of seeing a movement of change in evaluation protocols, so we kind of are seeing more focus on including student growth into the data and looking at our students growing within a teacher's class. Next, we're going to talk about the reactions to those kinds of changes. So teachers' unions generally do not approve of using student test scores for evaluation because they feel like it unfairly disadvantages certain teachers, especially teachers who are working with high poverty students or students who are really behind to start with, or students who may be learning English as a second language. And generally teachers' unions are also not in favor of using kind of merit-based pay, so determining raises based on evaluations or personnel decisions, so hiring and firing based on these evaluations. There's been a large number of lawsuits, which we'll cover in just a second, and the effectiveness of teacher evaluations is always up to scrutiny. We've read a lot of articles, even so far just in this course, about whether or not evaluations truly and accurately measure teacher effectiveness, and I think that's still something that we're kind of trying to figure out as an educational society. Now, the laws pertaining to teacher evaluations. So we're going to start with federal. So first, we have the Race to the Top initiative. So in 2009, under the Obama administration, the federal government passed $4.3 billion dollars in grants that were available to states if they reformed their evaluation procedures. And one of the requirements for those evaluation procedures was that states would have to start evaluating teachers based on their student performance. And then there also had to be at least 3 levels of effectiveness, so like ineffective, effective, and highly effective, or ineffective, like developing and effective. So there had to be at least 3 different variations. A lot of states overhauled their evaluation laws because of this, and then a lot of states began using a statistical procedure called a value added metric, and to determine whether or not teachers added value to a student's education. So they look at student growth and how they change with the presence of that specific teacher. Next, we go into a different federal law, the Every Student Succeeds Act, which ended federal regulation on how states are going to evaluate. So this was passed in 2015. So we kind of see the Obama administration kind of pivoting back and saying, oh wait, actually we're not going to determine state funding based on evaluation procedures. We're going to leave that up to the states, so much more of a states' rights sort of mentality. So evaluation systems are now designed by states, and they need to incorporate a lot of different factors, and they shouldn't only be based on student test scores. Those are 2 guidelines that the federal government does give. And then the federal government says that states need to train principals in order to give these evaluations and make sure that these are objective and not implemented in a biased way, and different evaluators are all kind of reaching the same conclusion about a given teacher. So we might refer to that as like inter-rater reliability. So the ESSA, does not guarantee teachers' unions the right to bargain their evaluations. So teachers' unions don't necessarily have the right or not have the right to discuss what should be included in evaluations when bargaining with a district. That's up to the states to determine if teachers have that right. The state of Kansas does not specifically guarantee teachers this right, but they also don't prevent teachers from having this right. And then evaluation laws in Kansas. So I looked up the evaluation procedures under KSDE, and so that's one of my sources that'll be on my references page, is this handbook for evaluation. So the aim here is so essentially Kansas has a few different metrics that they want districts to focus on, and then leaves the specific procedures up to the districts to decide. But these 6 ideas are kind of things that Kansas wants districts to focus on. So they want to be about continuous improvement. We want to be continually improving all of our teachers, not just our ineffective ones. We want to differentiate between who is an effective teacher and who is not an effective teacher. But we're supposed to actually go into 4 categories. So we have highly effective, effective, developing, and ineffective. They should be evidence-based, based on observations and student performance, both. And they should feature a regular evaluation cycle, which is at minimum every 3 years for veteran teachers, and every year for new teachers, or every semester for new teachers, and every year for teachers who have been there for 3 to 4 years. Evaluation should be used to give feedback and should, again, focus on teacher growth and development. And then finally, they can be used for compensation, so you can do merit-based pay in Kansas. Evaluation in the courts. So like I said, there's been a lot of court cases stemming from all of these evaluation changes recently. They're generally brought by teachers' unions on behalf of someone who has been fired, so generally on behalf of a teacher who's been fired. And they challenge a lot of different aspects of these evaluation laws. So some are procedural, so some challenge the way that the laws were passed through the states. I'm going to actually discuss one about the state of Kansas that's a little bit procedural in a second. And then some are substantive, so they challenge what the actual content of the law is. Like, should we be able to determine teacher pay based on evaluation? There's also tenure cases, so talking about whether or not teachers should have tenure. If they did have tenure and now tenure's been taken away, is that a violation of their rights? All that kind of thing, which is related to evaluation, but not necessarily the same. So evaluation rulings, these are just a few that I summarized from one of the articles that we read. So districts in Florida were ruled that they can use school-based metrics to show growth for all teachers. So just because students aren't being assessed by the state in the content that you're teaching, you're still being assessed on how well your school is growing overall with student growth. Teachers also can be given merit-based pay, and it doesn't violate their right to bargain for their payment. That's also decided in Florida. And then there's a lot of future cases on the docket that are currently in progress that haven't been decided. So there's cases about firing teachers who have been tenured, how student poverty or language status impacts these evaluations, and are the evaluations fair for all different types of teachers and students. The court case that I specifically wanted to talk about was Scribner and McNeamy, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing those names wrong, versus the Board of Education of USD 492, which is in Kansas in the Flint Hills District. And it was decided actually yesterday. So this is a super recent court case that was decided yesterday. I actually had heard about this case, but didn't realize it had been decided until I looked it up today to see. But the plaintiffs are claiming that the repeal of teacher tenure, which happened in 2014 in Kansas, was passed through an amendment. So this is a procedural claim on the part of the plaintiff. So they're saying because this never was a bill and never went through full committee, teachers' unions didn't have the right to lobby against it. Therefore, they feel that this teacher's property, which was tenure that they had gained, was taken away without full due process on part of the legislature. The Supreme Court shot that down and unanimously ruled against the plaintiffs, saying that if it goes through the legislator, then that's due process enough. Legislature is elected, so that is when people get to make their choice, is when they vote. So teacher tenure will not be reinstated because of this case. My experience with evaluations. So my experience with evaluations in KCK, as I've discussed before in previous assignments, my evaluations are pretty much solely based on observations conducted by my principal. I have never been informed of being evaluated based on student growth. I realize that that seems to go against KSDE procedure, but it's not listed anywhere in our negotiated agreement for KCK, and I've never experienced it, so I'm not exactly sure what's going on with that. We use the Marzano framework, which was mentioned in one of the articles that we used for a previous module in this course. So we set goals in certain disciplines at the beginning of the year, and then we're primarily evaluated in those areas. Observations, we have formal and informal, and based on our negotiated agreement, they have to be at least 30 minutes long each. So it also follows the state of Kansas's regulations for first and second year teachers, third, fourth year teachers, and then fifth year and beyond teachers. So teacher evaluation in KCK is covered in our negotiated agreement, which I mentioned, so that's where I got all of this information. So that means we do actually bargain on teacher evaluation, which, like I said, is not required in Kansas, but it's also not prohibited. Feedback must be provided to teachers within 72 hours of the observation by the person who's conducted the observation, and we have to sign off on our evaluation, which again follows KSDE procedure, and we can attach written comments to our evaluation. So if we feel like our evaluation isn't accurate or wasn't properly done, we can add in feedback that we feel about the evaluation. And then evaluations are used to tailor our professional development. So principals look at, these are the things that my teachers need to work on, and we use that in professional development. There are no raises in KCK based on your evaluation scores, but however, they can be used for personnel decisions. So like firing can be done based on this. However, if you're determining like, my school has to cut a teacher this year because of numbers, it's always based on seniority and not on evaluation results. So if you have ineffective evaluations in KCK, you go into this intensive assistance program, and you and the principal develop a directed growth plan where you have goals that you need to meet within an agreed upon amount of time, which is usually, in my experience, from what I've seen from other people, a year. I haven't ever actually known anybody to be on one of these procedures, but during my undergrad, I actually had to interview a principal about the procedure, and they informed me that it was usually a year. If there's not improvement, then the teacher would not be renewed. So if there's not improvement after the specified amount of time, the teacher wouldn't be renewed. However, the district does maintain the right to terminate or not renew at any time. So they don't technically have to put you through this intensive assistance process, but I believe it's the default that this is usually used. If teachers feel that they have been wrongfully terminated, they can request a hearing with the Board of Education, but there's no really protocol for independent review of teacher firing. Reflection. So as an administrator looking at all this information, I would want to make sure that I was staying really informed of all the relevant laws and district policies. So I read the KSDE evaluation handbook as well as our negotiated agreement for my district, and I think that that's something all principals should absolutely do before conducting any evaluations. They should also inform staff of these relevant laws, because I think that if staff know what laws there are, that really helps them. It helps them to know what they're being evaluated on, why they're being evaluated, what does this go into decision making on. And so I think that should be a part of professional development. And then as principal, you got to follow these procedures really carefully. You got to really walk the line on these and make sure that you are not stepping out of line in any way, and then take pride in providing quality feedback. So as an administrator, I wouldn't want to rate every single one of my teachers highly effective. I would want to be honest and talk about the way that we can continuously grow, which kind of focuses on that last point. Is I don't want a culture where every teacher thinks they're perfect. I want a teacher where every teacher is looking at, I'm already a great teacher, how can I improve even more? And I think that if you establish that culture with teachers, then they won't be as offended if you say, hey, there's this one area where I think you really need to improve. They won't take that as, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired. They're just taking it as, hey, this is part of my continuous improvement. Like I said, these are my references. It was the 3 articles that we used for the that we provided for the class, and then the KSD evaluation handbook, the negotiated agreement for KCK, and then finally information on that Kansas court case. Thank you guys for watching.